a meeting between European leaders and President Trump there at the White House. And it was really interesting. Multiple leaders saying they all want peace. And what's clear is that they're skeptical that Vladimir Putin actually wants peace, because you had at least a couple of them saying they want a ceasefire, which President Trump has abandoned his demand for after coming out of these Alaska talks. They don't trust that Vladimir Putin wants peace. They want a signal that he actually does, so they want the fighting to stop while they are trying to move forward with negotiations.
You heard Germany's Friedrich Merz and France's Emmanuel Macron both saying that a ceasefire is essential, and any phase of negotiations after this trilateral meeting that President Trump said is a question of when, not if, has to rely on a ceasefire to ensure that no further life is lost. Notably, President Trump during his remarks said many of us would prefer a ceasefire, seeming to acknowledge that at some point in the conversation that was brought up. You imagine it likely will be brought up again. One last thing, there was also repeated mentions of an Article 5-like agreement, essentially an agreement that other nations would intervene if, after some securing of peace between Russia and Ukraine, Vladimir Putin were to decide to go back in and take more territory.
Let's talk about this now with retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, CNN Global Affairs analyst Kim Dozier, and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia, Evelyn Farkas. She is also the Executive Director of the McCain Institute. And we're also joined by Jim Townsend. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO Policy. He's currently an adjunct senior fellow for the Transatlantic Security Program. Evelyn, to you first. It was interesting, as we heard, and I don't know that I've seen an Emmanuel Macron as stern as this Emmanuel Macron, whether it was in this family photo or sitting next to President Trump. He had a little wink, I think, for President Zelensky after he finished his comments, but otherwise it was pretty stone cold there. He's one of the ones, he's one of the leaders who pressed Trump on a ceasefire. And I wonder what you thought about that call from European leaders that may be indicative that behind the scenes there's even more pressure on that front from them.
Yeah, I mean, Brianna, first of all, I think it was really interesting to see how unified these leaders are amongst themselves. I mean, they clearly coordinated ahead of time. And, you know, starting with Chancellor Merz, they were very clear that a ceasefire is what they want. And as you said, Emmanuel Macron also was very strong. He was not smiling. He was, sober. And he also called not just for a trilateral meeting, but a quadrilateral meeting. So he's essentially signaling the Europeans should also be at another meeting after the trilateral meeting. Presumably, I guess the head of the European Union would be the fourth party there. Ursula von der Leyen. But I think they were clear about ceasefire. They were clear about security guarantees. Those two things were kind of the red lines for them almost. So it will be very interesting to see what comes out of this meeting. The one thing I just want to say quickly is that, we had a Budapest Memorandum, which was a political agreement. The US and the UK signed up together with Russia and Ukraine, of course, to guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty when they turned over their nuclear weapons. And this agreement was signed in 1994. Of course, it was violated, and the United States and UK came to the assistance of Ukraine, but not exactly the way Ukraine expected. So I think Article 5 is really important. These political agreements are not going to hold muster with the Ukrainian people.
Jim, what did you hear from these European leaders? It seemed like they were trying to push Trump in the direction of a ceasefire, even though he failed to secure one in Alaska.
That's right. It seems to me Trump is not going to go with a ceasefire. I think he really does feel that it's a waste of time. But I'm very interested in the trilateral meeting, because one thing that's been a problem is that whether it was Alaska or this Monday meeting, these have been developed very quickly, put together very quickly. Not a lot of thought being given to the strategic points and some of the thorny issues they're going to have to deal with too. So I'm hoping there's going to be some time between now and a trilateral meeting where some work is done on things like return of the children. How is that going to work? Or the coalition of the willing? What will that look like? in terms of boots on the ground from the Europeans. There's a lot of things that, reconstruction that they're going to have to deal with before they have a trilat. But that trilat gives them a forcing mechanism that makes them deal with these thorny issues and not just kick them down the road. So I hope we can get to some nuts and bolts pretty soon.
And Jim, what indications do you see that Putin is actually serious about wanting to negotiate in any kind of good faith, and that there is pressure in a real way, in an effective way, coming from the U.S. to get him to move in that position? Are you seeing that?
That's a great question, and I'm not really seeing it. And I was hoping that we could really use the tariffs and the destruction of the oil installations that Zelensky is doing to really put a lot of pressure on Putin through, making his oil exportation and importation, to try to hold that back so there's not the funding going in to Putin, and that's going to help dry things up. But he's not doing that. The only thing that gives me a little bit of hope is he seems to be allowing this coalition of the willing to involve non-Article 5 rules of engagement that the U.S. is going to have a role to play. This is something that Putin was against. He seems to be softening on that. And this is a big thing for Zelensky, is to have something rock solid. So maybe there's some progress there as we leave this meeting.
The counter argument from the administration, Evelyn, at least from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is that President Trump didn't push for sanctions against Putin after not securing a ceasefire, in part because if he did, that's where the conversation with Russia would end. I wonder what you make of that justification.
I mean, I think that leaders will talk to one another when they feel that it's in their national interest. So if President Putin gets pressured by us through sanctions, then, he may very well believe, as he did because he met in Alaska with President Trump under the threat of sanctions. If we actually impose sanctions, I think that kind of pressure is exactly the thing that gets Putin to talk, and not just talk, but actually deal.
Kim, what did you think as you were watching this round robin, I guess, in a way? It was pretty interesting to have each of these leaders have a chance to speak their mind for a few moments.
I feel like it was fascinating to watch them tag team Donald Trump. It's like they'd called each other up and figured out who was going to bring up what ugly point that Trump didn't want to talk about, so that Zelensky emerges as the good cop, and they were all sort of the medium troublesome cops. Two of them brought up, we really did want a ceasefire. We really need a ceasefire. Several of them made the point to say, Article 5-like security guarantees. Now let's remind everybody what Article 5 is. It's the part of NATO that says an attack on one is an attack on all. And the only country that's ever used it is the U.S. when the U.S. was attacked on 9/11. So this is to say in public and have Trump agree to it that, yes, we're going to give Ukraine some really strong security guarantees backed up by boots on the ground. And maybe it's just going to be U.S. intelligence and U.S. air support and continued U.S. weapons supplies that the U.S. would be paid for. But they don't want him to get talked out of this by Putin.
Notably, Colonel, one of the moments that stood out to me during Trump's remarks was that he specifically asked Zelensky whether he would want him at this trilateral meeting. He said that I would be there if you both want me there. Zelensky said immediately, yes, definitely would want you there. Is there a reason Vladimir Putin would not?
Oh, I think there are several reasons for us that he wouldn't. First of all, he doesn't recognize Zelensky as a legitimate head of state. And that is, he doesn't recognize Ukraine as a legitimate country. And so it would be essential for Trump to be there. Even if Trump doesn't want to be there, he has an obligation to be there because he needs to be, he's in a position now where he's basically the one, along with the Europeans, that can protect Zelensky. I mean, basically, if there was a one-on-one meeting between Zelensky and Putin, Putin would probably want to eliminate Zelensky one way or the other. And that's the kind of thing that you actually have to consider in this situation. There have been several assassination attempts against Zelensky, Putin would not, stop at that. And it would be one of those things where it would be very critical for the U.S. to have a hand in this to make sure that any type of process becomes a fair process so that the Ukrainians can really not only maintain their sovereignty, but maintain their system of government and protect their leadership.
Cedric and Kim, Evelyn and Jim, thank you so much to all of you for the analysis. We really appreciate it.